Good Shabbos. In 1990, the Dalai Lama, leader of the Tibetan people, called on a number of Jewish leaders to visit him in North India to advise him on how to retain your identity on foreign soil. Of course, the Tibetan people are not in their land. We don't hear much condemnation on China over it, but that's another story. And the Dalai Lama wanted to know how to retain their identity even as they're not in Tibet. So he called the Jewish leaders to find out from them. Now, we Jews are experts in how to retain your identity outside of your homeland. To the extent, here's a fascinating story. Queen Victoria, her husband was from Hanover in Germany. And so they were visiting Hanover, and she was pregnant with her first child. And she was 2 months prior to full term. But whilst in Hanover, she started getting labor pains 2 months early. Now, there was a big dilemma, because if the child was born in Hanover, he would be a German citizen and would not be able to be the monarch, to be on the throne. And so they didn't know what to do. Whilst there, Moses Montefiore visited the court, as he was a financial advisor there, and they told him the dilemma. When he went to shul later, he met Rabbi Nochum Schapiro, who was the rabbi there in Hanover, and he asked them the question, what should they do? So he said to them, they should take the queen onto a British ship, sail the ship 3 kilometers from shore, and if she has the baby on the ship in international waters, then he would be considered a British subject, and hence would be able to be the new monarch, or the monarch when time came. And indeed, that's what happened. That's what they did. They rushed around the ship, they went into international waters, and that night she gave birth to who became later known as King Edward VII. Well, Queen Victoria was very appreciative of Rabbi Nochum Schapiro for this advice. And when there was an ad for one of the big shuls in London was looking for a rabbi, a very prestigious shul, and there was a number of rabbis who submitted their application. She says, no, I know the right guy, Rabbi Adler. He's the one who was able to help me in my time of need and difficulty. He'd be able to lead this congregation and be their leader in times of, in all situations. And so it is that he became the rabbi, but that wasn't enough. She decided that he should really be the chief rabbi of England, actually chief rabbi of the entire Commonwealth. And ultimately he was for 45 years. So the reason for this, of course, was because he understood, the Jews knew. Why was the question asked to him? Because Jews know how to retain our identity outside of our natural habitat. So how is it? The guidance of that we can get from a mitzvah in this week's Torah portion. The Torah tells us about building the tabernacle. The holiest of items in the tabernacle was the Ark of the Covenant, which was placed in the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest was able to come to the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and be present in the same room as the Ark of the Covenant. In the Ark of the Covenant was the 10 Commandments, the Luchot, the tablets, as well as the Sefer Torah. So the Ark of the Covenant represents Torah. Now, the law was that all the vessels in the temple had poles, because the temple had to move from one place to the next. For 40 years, they wandered the desert from place to place. The temple was moved, and these vessels were carried by the Kohanim from place to place. The Levites, the Kohanim, carried the ark. And how did they carry it? They had these poles. They went through the vessels, and they carried it through that. Now, it's an interesting law. Even though all the vessels had poles, the other vessels, their poles not necessarily have to be in the vessel. They could be stored and only put into the vessel when it had to be moved. Whereas the ark, its poles had to be in it all the time. All the time the poles had to be in it. As a matter of fact, it's one of 365 commands not to take the poles out of the ark. Now, there's a technical reason for it, so that you don't have to move in a rush and then go get the poles and put it in. You don't fix it well, so it might slip and the ark might fall, and that would be terrible. So that's the practical reason for it, that it's given by the chinuch. But the reason that actually is relevant for us today, a reason, homiletic reason, shall we say, that gives us a message for ourselves in our times, and is the message of how Jews have been able to retain our identity, even outside of our homeland in Israel, is that the Torah doesn't have a place of permanence. The Torah doesn't have a place that here is its place, and then, okay, sometimes you have to move, so you get a poles and you move it, but now it's not in the right place. That's what would be represented if the poles were not in the ark. The fact that the poles were in the ark all the time represented the fact that the Torah is always movable, always can go wherever. Because there isn't a geography where Torah is relevant and another one where it isn't. The fact that the poles of the ark tells us that the pole is as relevant in Sydney as it is in Israel, as it is in New York, as it is anywhere else in the world. That's what poles in the ark represent. It is interesting that this coming week, we commemorate 82 years since the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe arrived in America on the 9th of Adar. When he arrived on the 9th of Adar in America, he announced he was going to make a yeshiva. Wherein a few of his supporters, great supporters in America, came into him after he made that announcement and said, Rebbe, you can't do that here. This is not Europe. It's not going to be accepted in the Jewish world here in America. America is very different to the old country. Think about it. When you talk about culture, take a culture and move it from one place to another, it doesn't retain the same culture. Yeah, you'll have some nice parts of it, but it's not. You can't have French culture in Australia like you could in France. You can't have Yiddish culture in Sydney like you would in the shtetl. Yiddish culture, however, is not Judaism. It's not Torah. So they come to the Rebbe and say, sorry, it won't play here in America. The Rebbe cried, he writes in a diary at night, these are my supporters. And he announced and he said, America is nicht anders, America is no different. The same Torah that is relevant in Eastern Europe is relevant here. And he went on to establish yeshivas and Judaism, and then our Rebbe had taken it to a whole new level of establishing Torah everywhere around the world. Why? Because the place of the ark is not in New York. It's everywhere. It's here in St. Ives. It's in every locale, because the Torah is relevant wherever we are, and that is our homeland. Heinrich Heine was a German poet, a German Jewish poet. Unfortunately, at age of 28, to achieve positions in Germany, he converted out of Judaism. Although when he passed away in Paris, he says God will forgive. That's his job. But he was, in a way, supported. He was a supporter of Judaism. But anyway, once some German intelligentsia were discussing the Jewish people as nomads, people without a land, people without a homeland. And he says, no, the Jews do have a homeland. It's a portable homeland. It's the Torah. The Torah has always been our portable homeland, and that is what keeps us Jewish. When we learn Torah, when a Jew might have been, had the drunken overlord who made his life a misery in the outside, but when he came home and he opened his Gemara and his Shulchan Aruch and his Mishnah, and his Ein Yaakov and Chumash, whatever he opened, he went into his homeland. He was free. And that's why we're here. If we want our kids to continue to be proud Jews, we must give them the Ark of the Covenant. We must give them the Torah. And we have to give it to them as theirs own. And it's not something that's out of place. Wherever it is, We're in our place. This is ours. And that's how we retain our identity wherever we were, because we had the homeland of our Torah. Now the Rebbe adds one more point, and that is that the ark represents Jews who have knowledge of Torah. And they always have to have staffs in them. They always have to have poles ready to be on the move, because it is their responsibility to see if there are Jews outside of the tabernacle who need support, who need to be educated. They have to be ready to go there and speak to them and teach and guide. We cannot just be introverted. We can't just be in our own little corner. We have to go out there, be ready to go out and to share the beautiful message of what Torah represents with every single Jew. And that's something not only for rabbis, but if whatever you know, you have to share with another, because you might know a lot compared to the little that someone else knows. And the one statement and the one word you say can be the living water that the other person needs to hear to retain their connection, their identity, their spirit, their morale. Always be ready to share an inspiring thought of Torah with someone else. Shabbos.